It killed a healthy man in 3 hours, targeted the wealthy almost exclusively, and then in 1551 it vanished, and no pathogen has ever been found. The sweating sickness struck Tudor England 5 times between 1485 and 1551. It ignored the poor. It ignored women, children, and foreigners. It hunted men who were well-fed, well-housed, and powerful. That is the exact inverse of every epidemic in recorded history. Every single one. And the only physician who left a clinical account watched it kill 2 men in a single afternoon and could not explain why the servants beside them survived. Welcome to the grim archive. Tonight's file, the sweating sickness. August 1485. Henry Tudor has just seized the English crown at Bosworth Field. His army marches into London, and within days, something marches with it. A new disease, one no physician in England has ever seen, begins moving through the city. It does not move the way plague moves. It does not settle in the alleys and the tenements. It moves into the merchant houses, the guild halls, the estates. Chroniclers note the deaths of aldermen, of wealthy tradesmen, of men of rank. 2 Lord Mayors of London die within weeks of each other. The disease had a signature. Contemporaries recorded it with grim consistency. It began with a sense of dread, an apprehension, some accounts say, before a single physical symptom appeared. Then cold shivers, then heat, then sweating so profuse it soaked through bedding. The critical window was the first 24 hours. Survive that, and most patients recovered. But the window could close in 3 hours. Contemporary accounts describe men sitting down to supper in good health and dead before the candles burned low. There was no rash, no swelling, no visible lesion a physician could point to, just sweat, and then silence. The outbreak of 1485 faded. Then it returned in 1508, in 1517, and again in 1528, the worst outbreak of all. By 1528, the pattern was unmistakable and deeply strange. The disease spread rapidly through England but barely touched continental Europe. When it did cross the Channel, it struck English communities abroad almost exclusively. Foreigners living among the English reported almost no deaths. Physicians noted this. They had no explanation. And within England itself, the poor were largely spared. The laborers, the servants, the peasants, the people living in the least sanitary conditions, eating the least adequate food, they survived. The men in the manor houses above them did not. In 1528, the sweating sickness reached the court of Henry VIII. Henry was 36 years old and obsessed with his own health. He had spent years fleeing plague outbreaks, moving his court from house to house. When the sweat appeared in his household, he dissolved the court immediately and retreated to the countryside, moving every few days, sleeping in different houses, taking almost no one with him. He survived. But 2 of his closest companions did not. William Compton, a gentleman of the bedchamber who had served Henry for over 2 decades, was dead within hours of his first symptoms. He was followed almost immediately by another courtier. Henry was told. He did not attend the funerals. The only physician to leave a detailed clinical account was an Englishman named John Caius. He was practicing in Shrewsbury during the 1551 outbreak, the 5th and final one. Caius published his account in 1552, a year after the last cases. He described the onset, the progression, the fatal window. He described healthy men dead in 2 hours. He noted carefully that women and children were rarely affected. He noted that the poor survived at rates that defied the logic of any disease he understood. And then he wrote something that no subsequent physician has been able to explain, that the disease seemed to require a kind of physical abundance in its victim, as if it needed something the poor did not have. Caius could not explain it, but he tried. He proposed that the disease was caused by corrupted English air, a miasma particular to the island. He noted it barely touched Wales or Ireland or Scotland. He noted it killed Englishmen abroad. This observation has never been satisfactorily resolved. If the disease were airborne in the conventional sense, it should have spread indiscriminately across populations. If it were waterborne or foodborne, it should have struck the poor hardest. contaminated water and spoiled food were overwhelmingly problems of poverty in Tudor England. Neither model fits, and so every generation of historians and physicians since has inherited the same unanswered question Caius left on his desk in 1552. Anne Boleyn contracted the sweat in 1528. She survived. This is one of the few documented cases of a woman of high status contracting the disease and recovering. Her brother George also fell ill and recovered. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, survived. The survival of the Boleyn family during the 1528 outbreak has been noted by historians, though its significance is disputed. The disease did occasionally strike women, and recovery was possible if the patient endured the first day. What is not disputed is Henry's reaction. He sent his own physician to Anne the moment he heard she was ill. He wrote to her. He was, accounts confirm, genuinely afraid of losing her, not to a rival, to 3 hours of unexplained sweating. Then, in the summer of 1551, the sweat came for the last time. It moved through England with familiar speed. Young men of good family died in hours. The poor, again, were largely spared. And then it stopped. Not gradually, not with a slow decline in cases over years. It stopped. The 1551 outbreak ended, and the sweating sickness was never recorded again, not in England, not anywhere. No subsequent epidemic has been credibly identified as the same disease. In the 5 centuries since, no skeleton has been found bearing its signature. No tissue sample has yielded a pathogen. The disease left behind only Caius's account, a handful of chronicles, and a pattern of deaths that still has no biological explanation. Modern researchers have proposed candidates. Hantavirus, a rodent-borne hemorrhagic fever, fits some features. The rapid onset, the respiratory distress some accounts describe, the geographic clustering. But hantavirus does not preferentially kill the wealthy. It does not spare women and children at the rates the chronicles describe. Others have proposed an anthrax variant, an unknown arbovirus, a form of relapsing fever. None has achieved consensus. Each theory explains some of the evidence and collides with the rest. The honest position, held by most medical historians today, is that the sweating sickness may have been caused by a pathogen that no longer exists in its 1485 form, mutated, extinct, or dormant in a reservoir no one has yet identified. What remains is the pattern. Every epidemic in recorded history has followed a predictable social logic. The poor die first, and in the greatest numbers. Overcrowding, malnutrition, contaminated water, no access to physicians. Poverty has always been the primary risk factor for infectious disease. The sweating sickness ran that logic in reverse. Whether the cause was dietary, the rich eating protein-heavy, salt-preserved food that altered some metabolic vulnerability, or immunological, or something else entirely, no one has settled it. John Caius died in 1573, 22 years after the last outbreak. He never saw the disease again. His 1552 pamphlet remains the most complete clinical account ever written of a disease that has never been explained. 5 outbreaks, 66 years, then nothing. The sweating sickness killed men at the height of their power and left the people with nothing largely untouched. It arrived with a new king and vanished before his granddaughter took the throne. No grave has given up its pathogen. No laboratory has matched its profile to anything in the known record. What Caius wrote in 1552 is still, 5 centuries later, the beginning and the end of what we know. A disease that chose its victims by wealth, by sex, by the fullness of their tables, and then chose to disappear. If you want the next file when it opens, subscribe. The archive is always open.